Well, hello, welcome. It's almost time for the Israelites to enter into the promised land. They're camped across the Jordan River near Jericho, place where they're going to enter that land of promise and have their first battle on the soil of their promised homeland. God tells Moses and Eleazar that it's time to take another census of all the men 20 years of age and up. Notice at the end of chapter 26, well, first off, chapter 26 is basically the results of that census. But you will notice at the end of chapter 26 how none of the men who were listed in the first census are in the current census except for Joshua and Caleb, for all have died in the wilderness as God had decreed that they would for their disobedience, their unwillingness to take God at his word and enter into the land. Because inheritance and family name pass on through the sons, an interesting problem arises for the Israelites when a man has only daughters. And that's what we cover um, that's what we begin to cover next. In the first place, the question is, does that mean that the family isn't going to receive any allotment of property in the new land? And in the second place, who inherits this property when the father who has no sons, has only daughters, dies once they're actually in the promised land? Well, just this case was brought before Moses by a couple of daughters whose father had no sons. Moses doesn't exactly know what to do with it, so he does what he always does. He takes the situation to God. And God agrees with the daughters that the family name and its possessions should not disappear, but should be carried on. Thus, God established guidelines for how a family name would be preserved and how inheritance was to be distributed when there were no sons. You'll read about that as you read through today. The principle itself is really quite simple. All of the clans of all of the tribes of Israel were all to have a share in the land, and it was not to be accumulated by a fortunate few. The only exception to this was the Levites, whom God provided for in another way. We'll learn more about that as time goes by here. Yet one other thing remains now before the people can enter the promised land. It's time for Moses to be gathered to his people. God will allow Moses to see the promised land, but he won't enter it because of his disobedience at Meribah of Kadesh, when he failed to uphold God as holy before the people when bringing water to them from the rock. Moses asked that God would set over the people another shepherd to lead them, and that God and the Lord tells him that that man will be Joshua, and that Joshua and Eleazar, and that Moses and Eleazar, should make that transfer before the people so that they would obey him. In other words, in the seeing of the people, so that they would obey him. So notice at the end of chapter 27 that there is one big difference between Moses and Joshua and the way that things are going to move forward. God will indeed direct Joshua just as he had done Moses, but not by speaking to him directly as he does to Moses. Rather, Joshua is told that he is to inquire of Eleazar the high priest, and that God will provide answers to him through the Urim, something that's a part of the vestment of the high priest, and that the Lord used to indicate his will in a way that, well, we really do no longer understand. We don't really understand how the Urim and the Thummim worked, but somehow or another, God provided answers to his people through those two devices, I guess we would say. God remains their leader, and God remains in communication with them, but never again directly until Jesus is born. So now the stage is set. We have a number of chapters to go yet in the book of Numbers. We have all of Deuteronomy to go yet through before we actually see Moses' death recorded. But everything's laid out before us. We're going to cover a number of other details and instructions and so on. Israel is ready to receive what God has promised to her. And not too far from now, that's exactly what will happen. Well, may God be with you and bless you. I pray that this chronological read through is continuing to enhance your understanding of God's scripture, and especially of the things that were happening during Jesus' life and during the time that Jesus walked with us here on earth. I look forward to gathering with you again tomorrow.